Hello everyone and welcome to the back room. This is the second of two videos taking a closer look at the largely forgotten Mac and PC emulators Aladin and SuperCharger. In episode 1 I put Aladin through its paces, and in this video I'll be having fun with SuperCharger. Launched in 1990 by Beta Systems Computer AG in Germany and marketed here in the UK by Condor Computer, the device sold for £299 and £349 for the half meg and 1 meg versions respectively. In the US, the device was marketed by Talon Technologies of Solana Beach, California. For your money, you got a neat little self-contained PC clone in a plastic box that made a reasonable stab at being colour matched to the ST, a disk of utilities to use with the emulator, DOS 4.01, a well-written manual and a joystick splitter cable that enabled the device to draw its power from the joystick ports. Wise owners put the cable in the bin and powered the SuperCharger from a separate 5-volt power supply. One nice touch is that by relocating the black plastic feet, SuperCharger can be oriented vertically or horizontally to suit your desk space. Elsewhere on the box there are power and data transfer LEDs here on the front, a reset switch on the front as well, and at the rear 2 DMA ports which daisy chained to the ST's hard drive port. There's also a power in and an on-off switch. To the left of the on-off switch there's a sticker revealing that SuperCharger was made for Beta Systems by Siemens. In the hand it feels well made and robust. Indeed, I've dropped it and knocked it over several times over the years without apparent damage. And on the inside the emulator is just as well made. So let's have a look inside. To open it you need to slide off these feet, and that will give access to the screws, and you can undo these with a Phillips number 1. And then a useful tool to pull the case halves apart. Sometimes you can do it with your fingers, but if not, a Mac cracker like this is a very good way of prying the case apart without damaging it, although as I said, sometimes you can work it apart with your fingers. With the case halves apart, the internals are revealed. Inside there's an NEC V30 processor, which is widely considered to be the best of the 8086 clones, and despite running at the same clock rate is said to deliver an improvement in processing speed of around 30%. This one is dated 36th week of 1989. Alongside that there's a socket for an 8087 Maths CoPro and a line of 4-bit 256 RAM chips giving a half or 1 meg of memory and various logic and glue chips to drive the DMA ports. The RAM chips are all Siemens as well and dated between the 27th and 41st week of 1989. And the device itself has a sticker which suggests a manufacturing date of 46th week of 89. As I mentioned in the first episode of these videos looking at hardware emulators for the ST, SuperCharger works in a similar way to the Atari 8-bit CP/M hardware emulators, such as the ATR 8000 and the Indus GT drive. In other words, the emulator is a computer in its own right and the Atari acts as a terminal to it. However, by the time SuperCharger appeared, the paradigm had shifted significantly, and this emulator has some very neat tricks up its sleeve, and more about that later. For now though, let's put the device back together, connect it to an ST and put it through its paces. To begin with then, I need to connect up SuperCharger to the computer, and this is done with a DB19 cable from a DMA port on the back of the device to the hard drive port on the rear of the ST. I'll also plug in a 5-volt power supply. As I said earlier, SuperCharger shipped with a joystick splitter that tapped 5 volts to power it. But that really doesn't seem to be a good idea. And if you're wondering, I'm using a 5 volt 2000 milliamp supply with a positive center. The ST I'm using is my original machine, as featured in part 1 of this look at emulators. I bought it in 1988 and it is all original other than a 1 megabyte memory upgrade. So with the disk drive powered up and the SuperCharger boot disk inserted, I'll turn on SuperCharger with the toggle switch at the rear and then turn on the ST. And I'll just make sure my monitor switcher is set for mono to support this monitor. That's better. Just like Aladin, it's a good idea to configure SuperCharger to suit your system, and there's an install program to do that on the boot disk. So launch, install, and you can configure the various options to suit your ST system. So at the moment we have SuperCharger set up for a DMA address of 3. I have 1 disk drive. Disk set rate is 3 milliseconds. You can alter this if you have a 5¼ inch drive. You can drop this as low as 6 milliseconds. There's no CoPro installed. I've got the VSync for the monitor set to 50 Hz and normal display on the monochrome monitor instead of inverse. There are other things I can do up here, such as install launcher, which is a very neat feature of SuperCharger. And with this installed, you can simply double click on a PC executable, a .exe, a .com or a .bat on the desktop and have it launch and run without first having to switch to SuperCharger, which is a very nice feature indeed. When your PC program or batch file has finished running, control is returned to TOS. But for now, I'm going to cancel that. And we will quit without saving here because I've already done this. So once installed, there are 2 ways to launch SuperCharger. You can either click abio.tos on the desktop here, launch it like a program, or you can go to the desk menu and elect to launch SuperCharger from here. Now, if you do this, the PC and the ST. So if you launch from the desk menu, launch it as a desk accessory, the PC and the ST work in sync, and that means that you can switch between the two machines whilst they're running using a hotkey combination. So this is by far, in my opinion, the best way to launch SuperCharger. So let's launch it now. And that's it. You now have a PC on your desktop. From PC mode, you can switch to the ST by pressing Shift, Control and Backspace, which will bring up the ST whilst leaving the PC running in the background. To return to the PC, select SuperCharger from the desk menu. Both logical computers, the PC and the ST, continue to run their respective programs in the background, and this is what the manual gleefully calls true multitasking. Alternatively, you can freeze the PC program and switch to ST by pressing Alt, Control, Backspace, returning as before with the desk accessory, whereupon the PC will continue where you left off. I think it's fair to say that this was pretty impressive in 1990. Even more impressive, SuperCharger owners who are also competent programmers are given a suite of tools to enable them to program the ST to use the device's V30 and 8087 CoPro in parallel with the 68000, and that really was impressive for 1990 on an essentially home computer. What's more, you can hook up more than one SuperCharger to get even more parallel processing power. Given the relative rarity of SuperCharger, I think it's pretty unlikely that anyone owned more than one device, but it's just possible that back in the day you might have had a friend with one. But now let's run some PC software and see how SuperCharger performs. First though, I just want to talk about screen modes. SuperCharger offers two screen modes, CGA and Hercules, and both will run on the ST's monochrome monitor, though of course you will have grayscale CGA in that case. To swap between the two, there is a utility called Set Video on SuperCharger's utility disk, and you simply switch by typing Set Video C or Set Video H, depending on whether you want CGA or Hercules. Now, one of the first measures of success for PC clones in the 1980s was an ability to run Flight Simulator, and here I'm going to try Flight Simulator 3, which is broadly the equivalent of Sublogic Flight Simulator on the ST and the Amiga. So starting Flight Simulator, we can elect to bypass these menus and have a go at booting the software, or we can set up Flight Simulator to suit the system. Now here we have a black and white monitor CGA. There's also a liquid crystal display but CGA, but I think I'm going to try this black and white monitor, so we'll select B here. Demo mode, and we have IBM PC function keys on the top for keyboard type. We don't want the flight time to be logged. Press any key to begin the demo. And there we are, Flight Simulator. It appears to be running. It is. Now it's true that the display looks pretty awful. There are lots of patterns instead of grayscales, and it doesn't look very good, frankly. If you squint at the screen and kind of hold your head back from it, you can just about make out the aircraft here on the runway. But it is actually working, and I don't believe it's very much better running on a PC, frankly. So occasional disk accesses as it pulls in maps and other views. Okay, here it is rolling down the runway. Now, it'd be interesting to see if we can switch back to the ST whilst Flight Simulator continues to run in the background. So let's give that a try. Ah, here we are, back at the ST. And if we want to go back to Flight Simulator, simply a matter of selecting SuperCharger from the desk menu, and hopefully Flight Simulator is still running. And of course that is the advantage of having a self-contained PC within this box here, and essentially using the ST as a terminal to it rather than running an emulator on the ST. Right, I think that is probably enough of that. Okay, so now I think we'll restart the PC with Control-Alt-Del. And just for fun, let's try running the Gem desktop, the PC version of the Gem desktop, and comparing it with the Atari version. Now this version of Gem is in fact the version that was shipped with the Amstrad PC 1512, but it appears to be working, although we may not get the mouse pointer to work, not using the ST's mouse anyway. So this is the Apple compliant version, in other words the version of Gem that doesn't have overlapping windows. It has tiled windows after Apple threatened Digital Research with an enormous lawsuit. Now let's try switching to the ST, and I think it's safe to say that the ST's version of Gem is Yeah, just that little bit nicer. Okay, back to the PC. We'll reboot it once again. And let's try an old favourite. WordStar. That looks to be working fine. And finally, we'll give Battlezone a whirl and see if it works. I don't have a joystick connected up at the moment. I don't think the mouse is going to do anything. No. And I'm not entirely certain what the key commands are that will operate this game. So I'm not doing very well. Ah. Okay, spacebar to fire then. So I think we can see that SuperCharger is in fact really stable, generally able to run anything that any other PC compatible could run, and actually quite a convenient way to have a PC on your desktop, especially if you didn't have a lot of space back in the day. It was quite expensive, I would say. You could pretty much buy a PC compatible for what you were paying for SuperCharger, but it did make for a small footprint on your desktop. So I hope you enjoyed watching that, everyone. Thank you for watching, and I will see you again in the back room.